Good morning, everyone. So I'm Barsha Das, and I'll be moderating today's morning session. In this session, forest biodiversity and the future of the third pole, we'll be discussing about the Himalayan crisis, an ecological system in which billions of people are dependent for water, climate security, livelihood. We'll try to understand from our experts how the forests are regulating the third pole, how the accelerating biodiversity loss will shape our future, and most importantly how community-based solutions and science-based governance is essential for a resilient future. So we have a very expert panel with us today, and let's start. So I'll start with just a minute, Dr. Sharma. So there are lots of recent findings going on. New studies have been undertaken. How these new findings are shaping our understanding of the Himalayan crisis, and what steps to be taken further.
Thank you very much. Before coming to the Eastern Himalaya and then forest, let me explain you a little bit about the third pole and what ecosystems we have. I think that is very, very important, and in the context of that I can come down to the forest. I think when we look at the third pole, this is one of the greatest mountain system in the world, and we have a huge varieties or diversities of ecosystems, from cold desert, arid situation in the west and north to wettest cold desert, also called Cherrapunji and that area. So we have from high altitude alpine pastures to a very beautiful tropical forest. So we have immense ecological diversity. So in that context, we have 8 countries in the third pole. What is the role of the Indian Himalayan region? I think that's very, very important. And in that context, 16% of India's area is in the Indian Himalayan region. And 86 million people live in this Indian Himalayan region. Most importantly, the 36% of India's forest actually come from the Himalayan region. So it's very, very important. We need to understand. And if we look at the glaciers, as was mentioned by earlier speaker, and water resource, we have to really see in that context. For India, it is 100% of glaciers and the alpine situation is in the Himalayan region. So 60% of endemic species. That means if this species is lost from here, it's lost from the planet Earth, is coming from the Indian Himalayan region. So we need to see, and many people talk about the importance of the Himalayas for water. 63% of water is actually coming from the Himalayas in India. So that means it's a really very important contributor. But in that water context, we have to also really see how the Himalayan forests are contributing. So before that, what is the status of forest within Indian Himalayan region? 39% of the Indian Himalayan region is forest. We have forest cover. And in that, Professor Baba asked me, how much is carbon? I think a year ago. Then I had to do that, a little bit of research and try to find out. So you'll be imagining that 39% is 23 million hectare of area forest, and biomass is 1,437 million tons. And in that, carbon is 719 million tons. And you'll be surprised to know, as you say, Himsagar, that is Eastern Himalaya, contributes 73% of carbon stock of the Indian Himalayan region. So it's a huge ecosystem asset, capital, that indicates that there is a huge contribution from our side in terms of carbon sequestration and carbon very much. Now coming to water, maybe I have to say there is a little bit of misunderstanding. if I look at three basins, major river basins coming down from the third pole, Indus is the one which has 80 to 85% water coming from glaciers and cryospheric region for irrigation. But if you look at Brahmaputra and Ganga, or Eastern Himalaya, when we are talking about Eastern Himalaya, 80 to 85% is coming from mountain forests, watersheds. So forest is so critical here. Water coming from glaciers in Brahmaputra is only 15 to 20%, and in Ganga only less than 15%. So forest management is most critical in the case of the Eastern Himalayan region and Central Himalayan region. Finally, to answer your question, I think what is the situation of forest in the third pole region? I think very importantly, forests are degrading in terms of quality. Maybe area may be increasing, but in terms of quality, it is not that forest. And then suddenly looking at, there are drivers of change very much. That needs to be very much looked into, and why they are changing. Land use, land cover change is a fundamental. We are converting much of the forest areas in terms of roads, infrastructure development. That is really causing, and also in terms of cropping also, we are really changing. Climate change is a big driver. We will maybe in other questions. Invasive species. Out of 8 countries, 145 alien invasive species are in the Indian Himalayan region. It's a huge impact in terms of forest. You can go to Sikkim or even in Darjeeling Hills, you will see even the native species are becoming invasive, like the small bamboos in high altitude areas because of climate change and impact and temperature change. So that is a huge impact. Habitat degradation, over-exploitation of bioresources, which is quite we see in the Eastern Himalayan region, and that is a big concern. And then of course fragmentation of landscape. So from my opinion, to really see the trend for future for the forest is managing multifunctional landscapes where all different land uses, all different resources, right from the glaciers to the foothills or the downstream is taken care of.
So I would like to talk to you. Dr. Sharma has given a lot of big numbers, but this wouldn't have been possible to my understanding without remote sensing and GIS monitoring. Monitoring is very important for a database, and that's your expertise. I would like to ask you how all these things, new tools for monitoring, are shaping our understanding of the Himalayas, and what further can be done.
Yeah, I think as you know that the most of the part of Himalaya is very remote and inaccessible, and when the satellite remote sensing came into being, we could survey the entire area in one particular time. So if you do with the ground, you cover in different times, but the satellite allows you to see that, okay, 1922 or 1955 or whatever particular year or particular month, you can do that. So that gives us a very important aspect, that the status at one particular time. The second is its repetitive nature allows you to monitor regularly. Say if you want to monitor every month or every year or every 5 years or every 10 years. So you have a continuous data which can tell you about the different changes which are occurring. It also sees in a different frequencies, so which our eyes cannot see, like in infrared and microwave, which our eyes cannot see. So some of the characteristics of the forest or other vegetation you can get better in infrared, because that is an area where it reflects maximum. So even there is a small change in the reflectance pattern can tell about the health of that vegetation. Then there are other bands which can tell us how much water is there in the river. So you get a different characteristics and you can identify different forest types or different types of vegetation. So all this is possible because of the remote sensing, and the Forest Survey of India regularly, every 2 years, they do the survey and they find out what is the state of the forest, including mangroves, and also they do the types, and as Dr. Sarma said, what is the carbon stock. So all these changes which are happening, whether it is dense to moderate to sparse or whatever changes over a period of time, and it is one of the best record from last 40 years. Every 2 years it's doing, which gives us a clear idea that whatever actions are taken by the government to increase the forest cover is also seen. Where the forest cover is decreasing is also seen. So all that information, which is very critical for policy, is available. So I think that is the most important contribution, which otherwise would not have been possible.
Ma'am, coming to you, your expertise is on community-based innovations. Well, that's one of my favorite points to discuss. As a journalist, I've been working with communities, so I've kept you for the last. So I would like to understand what's the, no matter how much data we have, it's ultimately the communities staying close to the forests, the mountains, who are involved in conservation. So what would you like to say on that? Any particular innovation process that has shown better results while involving the community?
So thank you so much. So first of all, I wanted to mention that we are not working in Eastern Himalayas, although I have been to Sikkim and Meghalaya a number of times, but we are in Uttarakhand and in 13 other states. But having said that, the experiences of communities are, can be replicated across. So, in terms of community engagement, I will just share a couple of stories. One is, in the plains, in the Aravalli Hills, we were, conserving the rootstock of Aravalli Hills. And that was not possible without community engagement, because you can't have fencing, you can't have, these big structures which are very capital intensive. So what can work is only social fencing and community fencing. So we worked intensively with communities, and it of course has to be long term, unlike these days which we are seeing across all CSR sector where we have short term projects. So community engagement is a long drawn process, and we worked for 2 or 3 years, and what we saw was phenomenal, how the rootstock was preserved. And at that time, we did not have LPG at, now of course we have Ujjwala scheme by the government. So a lot of firewood, the, wood was being cut. So, but the community really took on the initiatives, and they were the monitors of fencing. And having said that, now we see those small, in Himalayan region, what I have seen is how to develop micro zones. I think micro zones is very, effective. I know Eklavya ji has talked about the macro, level, but the communities, when we work with the communities, everything has to be demystified at the micro level. So, for example, in how small intervention like spring shed management, how we have seen examples of women getting together and preserving a patch uphill, and how they have been able to revive their springs just to preserve, and get more water. So I think micro zone management with women playing a key role, I think, is very important, and we need small innovations which can be adaptable and which can be scalable. I mean, those are many. We won't go into technical aspects. Simple thing like, in Uttarakhand, what we do is water, of course, you all know is a problem, especially for agriculture, and there is a lot of potential. So we work on a technology of solar lift irrigation from the rivers to the agricultural land, and how it can be distributed among the farmers. So simple technologies, but it needs to be managed by communities, where the communities themselves decide what is the user fees. And I see that there is a lot of difference between the plains and the hills. In plains it's much more difficult for water users, communities to, for example, charge a user fees. But for regions in the Himalayan region, the resilience among the communities is very, very impactful, and they are able to mobilize these micro projects for community resilience. So that is one thing. And another thing just I wanted to mention is that we have to work what I call is a tale of two waters. Tale of two waters, of course, engineering of glaciers. I know glaciers you mentioned is a small part, but there has to be forest conservation, but we have to engineer the catchments. I think that is very, very critical. And another very important thing is contamination, again, because I know in areas, for example in Arunachal or Sikkim, there is more biological contamination. In Assam, for example, there is chemical contamination in terms of arsenic, iron, fluoride. And we as an organization have developed indigenous technologies which are managed by communities to, low-cost filters which can be again managed by communities. So of course it's not related to forest, but it's basically the quality of water due to the forest coverage and the flow, it all gets impacted. So these are some of the strategies where we have to have community-based enterprises and community-based micro management projects.
Yeah, coming back to Dr. Sharma's biodiversity conservation, I mean, there are a lot of institutions, regional institutions. There is ICMO to have worked with, there is NEDA, there are other institutions. They are doing WWF, who are doing small projects or community-based projects. But can these be translated into a larger scale for climate adaptation, like overall something for the Himalayas, rather than individual projects?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. We started with ecosystem-based adaptation, which is for climate adaptation, bigger concept. But ecosystem-based adaptation, many people don't understand the people's engagement. So globally they said, okay, nature-based approach and adaptation. So when we look at that, how that biodiversity conservation can be achieved to these nature-based or ecosystem-based adaptation, I think very clearly, first of all, if we want to really have that adaptation, is to protect, then we have to restore and manage the ecosystems in the mountains very much. So that is the first thing. But we cannot forget society. There are societal challenges which is also coming while we are doing this. So in that, I think the most important four societal challenges, if I look at this region, is climate change, very much. The disasters, so we heard from you also about the disasters which is happening, biodiversity loss, and water insecurity because of many factors. So these are very, very vital and important to have biodiversity conservation related adaptation, because water is required for biodiversity. Biodiversity as such is required for water recharge in the systems. So there is a reciprocal relationships that is happening. And if I look at the Eastern Himalayan region and biodiversity, amazing. Nowhere in the world you can find 3 global biodiversity hotspots meeting here. Indo-Burman, Himalayan, south-west mountains of China. And this is the place where the evolution of species and new species are formed. here. So you will see so much of endemism. Why? Because the species interaction has taken place here because of 3 different hotspots. Elements are coming and interacting. And in that situation, if we are going to lose or if we don't use biodiversity for our climate-related adaptation strategies, it is not going to really help. So in that context, what is quite important for us is also to look at some of the assessments. See how much biodiversity we have in the Himalayan region. If we compare 15th century, we are working with only 30% that is remaining. We have already lost 70% in last 5 centuries. So with 30%, the Hindu-Kush Himalayan assessment, which was published in 2019 by ISIMOD in Springer Nature, it clearly says for the Indian Himalayan region, the way climate change is happening, and if it continues like this, 1/4 of the endemic species will be lost. So you can imagine it's a huge impact. If it is lost from here, it's lost from the planet Earth. So in that context, what should be our biodiversity conservation strategy very much is to really enhance adaptive capacity of both the ecosystems as well as people living and depending in the mountains as well as people in the downstream. So that adaptive capacity is very important. Then conservation capacity, we don't understand, we say adaptive, but I think if we want biodiversity conservation, our conservation strategy and adaptive strategy, both has to go hand in hand very much. We have to have enabling conditions. Means our government, our protected area management, people, we have people working here in community conserved areas. If the government is not supporting that, private conservation effort, it will not happen. Societal capacity, most important thing is system thinking. We go for forest and we say this, we go for agriculture. No, we have to think in a systems approach, and I have to say that investment to the Himalayan region from the governments of these 8 countries as well as global community is minuscule. The amount of ecosystem services it provides is more than 50% of global goods and services. So in that context, the amount of investment in research, in education, in health, in ecological management, ecosystem management is very small. I think if we really want to achieve biodiversity conservation and climate adaptive, the global community and the regional governments have to invest in Himalayan region.
So we are talking about, back to you, we are talking about how investment is important for research, and we see a lot of research and monitoring definitely happening, but you know, what are the key factors? Are there anything like key factors that has been pointed out that these are risking? We see a lot of anthropogenic changes. We talk about development. In the name of development, many traditional practices like in the eastern Himalayas or even in Ladakh, we see, you know, the yak herders we talk about, they were migrating. They are annual, they used to migrate annually, but we are following new trends. Semi-sedentary models are being practiced. Like when we see for the last 40 years, our traditional habits have changed. How is this reflecting on the biodiversity change, or what do you see in the future? If we adapt to more development, I mean the strategies for development, how is it reflecting? Yeah.
Thank you very much. If you see the biodiversity and the climate, it's a very close interaction. And if you see in last 1,000 years or so, like from 10th century to 15th century, the climate was very warm, and the rains, there were a lot of droughts and floods. If you come to 15th to 18th century, what we call as a little ice age, the climate was dry, and there were more pronouncement of the droughts. After that, we had an industrial revolution, and last 150 years or so, we have seen that change in the temperature and the carbon dioxide. Okay. Now, when you look at the future, most of the time we look, if we talk, let's say, about Eastern Himalayas, the changes which are likely to happen is that the rainfall is likely to decrease about 8%, and it is increasing about 8% in northwest. The warm days are going to increase here. But also the very important thing which normally is not done is the level of carbon dioxide is also going up. And when the carbon dioxide also increases, the type of photosynthesis which happens, the stomatal conducts in C3 plants like the rice and all reduces. So woodlands also, the forest. In grass, they are more adapted. They have a C4 type and they would be more pronounced. Okay. So we have to see how the level of carbon dioxide, the temperature, the rainfall, droughts and floods, all together is going to shape what kind of a changes we are going to accept. The second thing is, we do not have a base level of a biodiversity from which we are going to measure. Most of the time we do not have a location. That particular plant was existing at this location after 5 years, whether it is there or not. Now, the only information across the Himalaya available is landscape level biodiversity, not individual, but as a particular, like what do you have in floodplain, or what do you have in certain slopes, or like that. But this is also not repeated. See, if you want to really see a change, like census is done every decade to find out what are the changes. Here also we need to have that kind of a system, that we have a location-based assessment of what kind of flora, fauna is available, and then you repeat every decade. Now, I know similar system has been planned for the ocean, what we call as a census of marine life, where from this top to the bottom, all the kinds of plants and animals are recorded at a particular location. It's a gigantic task, but at least some areas have been covered. I think on land also we need that system. That, okay, this is what was existing in 2025 December. Go back in 35 December and see whether what is it. Otherwise, what we are saying always is some kind of a assessment which is based on certain models which have a high uncertainty. Because some of the models says we have lost 1,000 times of the biodiversity, which I don't think is, and if you see over a period of time in the entire evolution of the earth, right from the changes which occur, like if you say the human beings, why we have been more adaptable than other animals? The reason is, in Central Africa, during those times, during last 200,000 years or so, there were alternative drought and wet seasons. And that is why it became forest and grassland, forest and grassland. And this, of course, it took, say, 300, 400, 500 years. For us, it's a very long time, but in our term, it is a very short time. At that time, the human beings were hunters. Okay. The kind of food which you get in forest and kind of food which you get in grassland is quite different. But humans adapted to that. Okay. And that is why we survived. So, any change is not necessarily always bad. Okay, if you see the whole system, whole entire system, it depends on the change. You have a change in seasons, you have a change, I mean, wherever you see, there is a change. Okay, so I think in future, also we are going to face the changes, and those changes will reflect the kind of climate which we have. Now, but what is we are doing is with our activities, that we are accelerating that process. Okay. Now, whether the plant and animal life would be able to adapt that fast acceleration is not clear. So we need models to understand this kind of change which is likely to come. Because the past changes which has happened, they were quite, long periods, 100, 200, 500 years. So that's important.
So you have pointed out something very important about not having enough baseline data. So I'll come back to you on that. That's something important we need to discuss. Ma'am, coming to you, when we talk about involving the community for conservation, one important aspect is livelihood. What are they gaining from that, or what are they losing with all these changes? How are we looking into the financial aspect, the monetary aspect, or the gain, like livelihood gain for communities?
Yeah, so as you know, the communities are mostly working on small and mixed farming, and there is large-scale youth migration. I know we have so many young people from the university, and in our office we have some people from the hills, and they don't want to go back. I tell them, whenever we start working in the Eastern Himalayas, please, we will ask you to, take on. But nobody wants to come back. So I think, because of, lucrative economy, and I think that is very critical. So we work with, in Uttarakhand, we have established a farmer-based company where we work with them on, conserving soil health and water availability to increase the productivity. And then we are promoting high value crops. I know Seleshi talked about change, and we have to introduce more resilient crops which can be grown. It could be millets which has less water. I mean, of course, this area is not dry. It's not desert area, but we have tried that. But high value crops, vegetables especially. Then we have made zones on, say, almond cluster, allied activities as bee cluster, and then on a much higher altitude, kiwi cluster. So we have to work on those strategies, and both in input as well as output. I think it is very important to work on a complete value chain. And I know you talked about inaccessibility, so of course that is very important. So we are also trying to tie up with other FPOs which we have developed across multiple states for inter-FPO trade, and of course critical is soil health, so soil testing, micronutrients, and promoting water efficient agricultural practices. Again, water is very critical, as we all know. So micro irrigation, drip irrigation. Large scale mechanization is difficult to promote because of the terrain, but we have promoted. There are, for example, tractors which just use 17 horsepower of electricity rather than 40 plus HP. So small tractors in terms of weed cutters or brush cutters, which again the toolkits are given to these women FPOs who are then working with the communities. So I think those are some of the aggregation of activities which we are using, and we have to look at water, energy, and food nexus. Nexus I call it because, of course, even if we use some mechanization, it requires a lot of energy. So we have to see how it can be tied to solar. So water, food, and energy is an interrelated package which we are looking at, and some of these can be promoted.
Sir, a last set of questions. Probably this one would contradict what ma'am has just said, but out of curiosity, when we are talking about development, livelihood, we are introducing a lot of hybrid things, hybrid crops and everything, as ma'am suggested. But we are also talking about, as you said, invasive species. I found something in Nagaland, in a remote village. They were during the millet year. International Year of Millet, so the hybrid millets were introduced, but the community said no, we traditionally had millets, but over time we shifted to rice, but now if the government is again introducing millet, we will rather search our old millets species and get back than having the new ones, because the rice has already done a lot of damage. So when we're introducing new things or newer species, we are talking about palm oil. I recently heard about something called tum oil in Mizoram. So how are these impacting? I mean, where do we draw the line?
I think this is a very, very important question when we are looking on one hand the conservation, on the other hand livelihoods of the people. People have to have their livelihoods. So in that context, I mentioned nature-based solution means something which we have right there in the nature has to be used for solution. So what you are saying, we do have in our traditional systems good millet or some form of palm or some form of oil which were used traditionally. The problem right now I see, for Himalayan region we have niche products, very high value products. You can't think about green gold, cordyceps, how it was developed, and $80,000 for 1 kilogram of cordyceps. We have such high value products, and we are always thinking from outside. The problem here is non-mountain specificity, non-mountain specific policies. So some people with investment money, they come from outside and they try to put new approaches which is attractable for some time, but in the long run it is going to have huge impact on the ecosystem as well as livelihood of the people. You can just see what has happened by many plantation crops which has happened already in Northeast India. So in my opinion, the approach totally has to change and go with nature-based solution, which means there are solutions in the nature. We need to do research, we need to be vigilant, and we try to see what has been in the traditions and use them. The issue is how we really put that in business model. What is the economy of scale that we are thinking? Climate smart agriculture, when we say, we don't want a replacement by an exotic or hybrid from outside. We want to really see in nature which has been climate. For instance, last cardamom, which is cultivated in Sikkim, Darjeeling and Nepal. When the problem of climate change started consistently for many years, there was no winter rains, no flowering. After that, the plants, the production got down, people started leaving it behind. So the solution is there. What is the solution? You look at cardamom, there are resistant varieties. You look at cardamom, then what are the possibilities? See, it's for a marginal land, this plant. It has expanded to Arunachal Pradesh and other Nagaland also. So now we have to see very much in terms of resilience for one crop. What are those resilience? For example, in cardamom, what we were able to do is to have resistant variety, number one. Number two, then have, it needs shade tree. So instead of this thing, you combine with kiwi. So you get production from kiwi as well as, that is exotic, but that has been tested very well for over almost 30-40 years in Sudan and other areas. So you look for other varieties also, and then you combine with that, and then integrate with the local honeybees. Don't be Apis mellifera from Europe, but have Serena from this region and promote it. Then it gives both pollination as well as gives additional honey income to the people. Then have a spice garden, homestays in those cardamom states, and then also branding, value adding. So you see so much of source of income that gives the resilience to the farmer. and even the local solutions can be really integrated in much more adaptive and resilient way. So I simply would like to see there are answer solutions in nature right wherever you are working in the Himalayan region. We have to be vigilant, we have to do experiment, we have to really see which one works, and we have to have economy of scale in Himalayan region. Last thing from my side, anything in the Himalaya brought from outside, we have to be vigilant, whether it is mountain specific, whether it meets the needs of mountain, whether it has a very special value, or whether it can be systematically be part of the ecosystem. If not, I think in haphazard way we should not bring these all caste oriented crops, which is going to be very, very I think short-sighted, and it is not going to help.
Definitely, I guess local ecological knowledge plays a big role.
So for, you see medicinal plants, we have so much of enormous, so much of wealth of knowledge is also there. So we should definitely use traditional practices, traditional knowledges, and bring the modern scientific knowledge and build together. The issue right now, big issue is the population, as Dr. Sailesh Nayak was mentioning. So over these, but I think in the history of Earth, I think the population is one of the big driver, and here is the human population that is causing a huge impact. So in that context, the change has to be looked into that direction.
So coming back to where we left, baseline data. Well, I have been working on something, or writing an article rather, not working is a big word, on mangrove restoration. So the two factors when we talk about restoration is baseline data is very important, as you suggested, on which to build the projects, and secondly monitoring. When it comes to conservation or restoration of the Himalayan biodiversity or ecosystem, how is it shaping up? Like, there are many projects, carbon credit projects coming in, many CSR activities happening. So where is the monitoring? I mean, is it happening? Do we have a standard procedure?
Yeah, I mean, that is a standard procedure. Every 2 years, FSI does mapping of the mangroves, but only as a one class. They don't do further classification. Actually, there are 2-3 things which has to be kept in mind when you work. The first is the mangroves. There is basically it is in the intertidal area where the fresh water and the marine water interacts, and where you have a predominance of fresh water, you will have acanthus and those kind of plants. You know better than me. When you have the marine influence is higher, you have Avicennia or rhizophora. Okay, and like in Sundarbans, if you go, the Sundari trees, Heritaria, is mainly because more of a fresh water. Okay, so when you want to restore, I think these aspects, that what is the tidal characteristics, what is the soil character of the mud, kind of a mud which you have, based on that you need to plant the mangroves. And actually it's pretty successful in Gujarat, which used to be around 400 square kilometer, now it is almost 900 square kilometer. And this is essentially because perceived idea of the carbon credit. But in India there is no such thing as a carbon credit as of now. Okay, but I think, but in a way, whatever may be the cause, it is a good thing to have a mangroves, because it creates an habitat for a variety of things, like certain crabs and lobsters, and the certain breeding ground for the certain fish, shrimps. So I think whatever reason we may be doing, I think it's very important. And I know that in 87, 88, we did, it was around 4,000 square kilometer all over India. Now it is about 5,000 square kilometer all over India. And people, and the most important thing is the one is the response of the government to this, which is very positive. But the more important is how the people are looking at it. And wherever we have been working, I found that the people are very keen to protect mangroves. Where they know that what is the value. Because the economic value of the ecological service of mangroves is not well known. What we know is what is the timber or a certain fish or what you get is the value. But what you say that we need to put about carbon sequestration, so that value also is very important. And also now cultural value. Now, if you go to Sundarbans, there is a tourism for mangroves. In Bhitarkanika. So, in Gujarat Marine National Park. So, I think the more and more values have been coming up, and our rough calculation which we did is about per hectare of a mangrove gets about $2,000. If you put all those things per annual. So it has a tremendous value. But also we have to see when you do the restoration, the other part is like in Sundarbans. The freshwater flow is more or less same, but the sea level is rising, and it is rising around 11 millimeter per year in Sundarbans. And by end of the century, it would be about 4.5 meter in Sundarbans. So, if you see the boundaries of the mangroves, the Avicennia has increased, replaced by the Heritaria. Heritaria is decreasing and the Avicennia is. So when you want to restore, if you plant Heritaria, it is not going to work. You have to see that you plant Avicennia or Rhizophora, which can sustain this rise in the sea level. So accordingly you have to plant. So it is not just planting mangroves, but you have to see which plants will happen and projection, because that what is likely to happen in next 10 years. That also should be kept in mind. I think then it will work pretty well. Thank you.
So I think because the impact, the disaster is very evident when we talk about coastal regions. So the work there is also probably more than what is going on in the Himalayas. Maybe communities are more aware because of constant cyclones. The disaster is more in the mountain regions. It's probably not that very evident. It's quite slow. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, of course, mangroves has certain capability to withstand the impact of the cyclone or any other storms. But that also, you have to see what kind of mangroves are. See, when you have the kind of a rhizophora, which is a still true, will be better to sustain the onslaught of the. But when you have a pneumatophores, what happens is that it gets covered with the mud, and these roots can't breathe, and they will shed the leaves, and they become little weak because there is no photosynthesis. So they will more prone to be damaged than the rhizophora. So I think what cyclone or any particular thing, everything you could just say mangrove, it's not going to work. But you have to see the overall aspects, and then we have to make a plan on this.
Before we wrap up, a last question to ma'am. When we talk about conservation, women is a very important aspect. In fact, I've seen in all this project, mostly it's the women who are involved, be it in the Sundarbans, be it in the Himalayas, in northeastern parts. For men, as you say, they go out for work probably. So that's why they are not that involved. How is the involvement of women shaping the entire process?
So, first of all, when I mentioned about high value crops, I did not mean hybrid necessarily. And I said high value. And I agree with you about the nature-based solutions. We do a lot, especially in inputs. as well as in terms of compost units. Those are very, very critical, I think. So yeah, so we have established women leadership schools, across various locations, and including in Himalayas. And what I see is the resilience among women is phenomenal. They have to somehow, they know that they have to make it a success. And I think in the mountains the women are very, very strong. I was talking about this to someone this morning, both in terms of, although they are restrained, they have a lot of strenuous hard work, but in terms of their physical, and biological strength, I think it is tremendous. And for example, I went to Uttarakhand last month, and we have done is that a group of women, they have built a gravity-based water which they have brought to their village, and otherwise they had to go long distance to get water. And wild animals, there's always that conflict, there's always that scare, especially for women. In some villages there are no toilets, for example, and they have to go in groups. There are a lot of hardships. So when women come together, I think the call for action is phenomenal. When they come together as a collective, they can create big changes, great impactful work. You were talking about impact. We have a lot of quantitative as well as qualitative data to show how when women come together they create a larger impact. And this impact is not linear. It's not 1 + 1 is equal to that impact. What you were talking about, systemic change. There is a systemic impact, there is non-linear impact. I think that resilience gets replicated to the neighboring villages, and that is the way to really snowball the whole region.
So with this, we are wrapping out today's discussion. A few takeaway points. The third pole is not just an ecosystem, it is a water tower and a shared climate lifeline. What emerged from today's discussion is biodiversity, technology and community leadership are not separate silos. All these need to come around together. Protecting the Himalayas would require not just scientific research. We need all this to be made into government, government schemes or programs, projects, and most importantly, communities. The people living closest to the land needs to get involved. They need to have an active participation alongside our researchers and experts. So yeah, it was a wonderful discussion. Thank you to our panel and to all for joining us in this dialogue. Thank you.